Oh, yeah. All right. Well, let's talk to John Gartner. He's a psychologist, a psychotherapist. He's an author and activist. He's also a former part-time assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University Medical School, and he's been talking a lot about this. And maybe after we finish the whole Trump thing, he can figure out what's wrong with us. John, great. John, good to have you here. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. I know you moved some patients around to talk to us, so thank you. I hope nobody does anything bad in that period of time.
I think they'll be okay.
Us or his?
So
them.
There's been
them.
Okay.
I don't know about you.
There's been a lot of talk from psychologists and psychiatrists from a distance, since nobody's actually had the opportunity to interview Trump in depth and try to get to the degree of his sociopathy. But what are the telltale signs that you see in his demeanor and his language, and how worried are you both as a professional and also as a citizen?
Well, so on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 as far as the worried, but let me answer your first question because it's a long answer. First of all, to diagnose dementia, we need to see cognitive decline. And if you compare speeches that Trump made in the 1980s, he actually had a very rich vocabulary. He spoke in polished paragraphs. Now, as you've pointed out, he can barely finish a sentence. In many cases, can't finish a word. And in many cases, has no words at all, but just makes sounds. So that's clearly a regression. And actually, Sharon Begley for Stat Magazine, she's a science writer. During the first Trump administration, she had a group of neuropsychologists read those speeches, view those tapes. And as a group, they agreed that there had been substantial cognitive decline suggesting of organic illness. So that was back then. But he's deteriorated massively since then. And this is what happens with dementia, and people need to understand this, is that not only is it a deteriorating illness, so I always say to people, the Donald Trump you see today is the best Donald Trump you're ever going to see, because he's only going to be deteriorating from here. But the rate of deterioration accelerates, and that's what's happening. So at first we were comparing him to himself in the 1980s. Now people who visited him recently said he's not the same man he was 4 years ago. So with this accelerated... So with this accelerating rate of decline, you do the math, okay? And what actually happens at a certain point, they fall off a cognitive cliff and they become completely disabled. And I think that he's closer to that cognitive cliff than people realize. I'm utterly certain he could not make it through 4 years without becoming completely cognitively disabled. But let me talk about the evidence.
Can I ask you a question real quick about it?
Sure, of course.
My question is, having spent 4 years with him, these were things that I noticed. And tell me if that is part of cognitive decline. There were a couple of times where I saw his hands shake uncontrollably while he was talking. He would look down at you and wink and then look and was lost and would look back at you. And as if, there were a couple of times where he would look back at me and actually like what's going on type of thing. Then there were other times.
A blank look, like he's disoriented.
Disoriented.
He's doing that more. He's doing that
5
more
feet
now.
away from him. And these were things that I noticed that during his time in office came more frequently. They were very infrequent in first, but during that last year in office, it seemed like there were more and more of those issues. And we would talk about it in the press corps, but look, we're not doctors. I wouldn't supposed to know. But those were things that I saw, and I just wondered, what was I witnessing?
No, you're absolutely right. And we're seeing them more now on tape. Like he was talking about Russia and Iran, and then he just goes,
Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, that's
and
common
he
for him.
looks up at the
Like an
sky.
alcoholic.
But he looks up at the sky and he really is blank for a moment.
Yeah.
And by the way, this thing about the Gettysburg speech, I think what we're seeing more and more is his total disorientation. His not knowing who's president, his thinking that Biden beat Obama, his mixing up Pelosi and Haley. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here because one of the things I want to talk about is deterioration in memory. Okay, people want to tag Biden with having some cognitive decline because he calls the current president of France by the old president of France's name. Well, I call my younger daughter by my older daughter's name. So that's the normal thing that happens with aging.
He didn't call him our appointment wrong. Yeah, he didn't go back, 50 years, right?
Right.
Yeah. But John, let me say this. In fairness, somebody in the 80s is going to be less sharp in this year, like just normal. Not. I'm really interested in the falling off the cliff part. You know, I am 65. My kids are. I'm a single dad. They're 8 and 11. I have a lot of freaking Post-it notes up, and I get up every morning and look at my mirror and say, "Go look at the Post-it note on your," because you do learn to because there's parts of the memory that seem more valuable that you, and then the other parts you could learn to operate with it. And so,
Right.
but this falling off a cliff thing, that's the scariest part for me. I'd love you to describe that.
Well, I think, in other words, where he would become completely incapacitated and disoriented. I mean, actually, you will start to see some of that in the Gettysburg speech. You know, I actually would like to, if I can, read the Gettysburg Address to you, but decoded. And so there's three things I want to say about it before I read it. The first is he's completely disoriented. Okay, he doesn't know what Gettysburg is. And by that, I don't mean he doesn't know the true spirit of Gettysburg. I also don't mean he's ignorant about history. He doesn't really know. No, I mean, he's like, he could be anywhere in the world. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what it means. He knows it's important. And one of the things people with dementia do. Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, it's funny you say that, because when people have dementia, one of the things they do is they use superlatives as filler words, because they don't know what's happening. They just go, great, wow, incredible. So you're going to see some of that. The other thing is they become disoriented and they start to make up stories. It's called confabulation, because nature abhors a vacuum. So if you have no memory about the context of what's happening, you make one up. And that's what that Robert E. Lee story is about. So yeah, so let me just read it, the Gettysburg Address. The Battle of Gettysburg. What an unbelievable, so much, so interesting, and so vicious and horrible, and so beautiful in many ways. It represented a big portion of the success of this country. Okay, and then he goes on to the Robert E. Lee. You know, the statement of Robert E. Lee, who's no longer in favor. Did ever notice that? No longer in favor. Okay, so that's just a sop to the racists. But now he's going to make something up. Never fight uphill, me boys. Never fight uphill. They were fighting uphill, and he said, "Wow."
But how much of it?
And he lost his favorite general.
Yeah, but how much of that is just lying? Like when said, read your favorite Bible quote, when he's like, "Yeah, I've got so many. I would not like to take him to."
I'll tell you what the difference is. No, it's an excellent question, and these are the different. Ironically, he's so impaired premorbidly that these become the difficult differential diagnostic questions, because you're right. He always lied. He always told stories, you know, whatever, you know, he sparred with Muhammad Ali or whatever, you know, he makes up stuff. But it's more like someone in a nursing home does, where they say something that couldn't have happened, that everyone knows didn't happen, that it's bizarre. He's not just vaunting himself. He's making something up that is, it's not benefiting him. It's just bizarre. And so he's making it up. And the things like about Obama, about Biden having beaten Obama, obviously he's disoriented there. And, you know, if you go to an emergency room of a psychiatric hospital and they ask you who is president of the United States, and you say Barack Obama, there's a 90% chance they'll admit you for observation, because you're disoriented.
Especially for Donald Trump.
Yeah, well,
I also think that him talking about that cognitive test he allegedly took, camera woman, whatever, and continuing to talk about it, because that's so embarrassing to a normal person. But he keeps saying, he stops interviews, "I took the test. It's very hard." I mean, again and again over all these years. That
because he knows the truth, and he's being defensive about it. He knows that actually, first, we only give that test to people we suspect have dementia, and so saying you aced it doesn't mean you're Mensa. It just means you didn't.
Is it crazy, really? Just this week, it was reported that an illegal alien, and you just look at this, what's happening.
What happened?
I got to give him credit for that. He knew he couldn't say the word, so he's like, "Plan B. I'll just riff off."
Illegal alien? What's the word he couldn't say?
Alien.
It's very actually. This is where talking to doctors helps. Okay, this is a formal sign of dementia. It's called a phonemic aphasia, where you use a non-word, use a sound that is not a word, but has a piece of the word in it. And you've probably seen supercuts, either Ron Filipowski on Twitter or the Comedy Central, or actually, if you listen to the Democratic her hearings, Nadler and Swalwell each shown their own supercuts of these phonemic paraphasias. This is not something someone does if their brain is not broken.
Right.
Well, let me ask this. I was at the press briefing when Dr. Ronnie came out and said Donald Trump could live to be 200, and I was standing. We had all the information from his doctor.
He was so high when he said that.
I think it was like he was zooming, baby. But so I'm there's I'm with CNN's guy, who does their medical stuff, and we're looking at it, and I go, look, my dad had heart problems, and there seems to be elevated calcium here. And he goes, yeah. He said, this is the beginning of heart disease, and it could be, help lead to cognitive decline. Is that right? I mean, could heart disease
Sure. A lot of things can hasten cognitive decline. Even in the psychological pressure he's under right now with his trial is hastening his cognitive decline. But you're right. Ronnie Jackson lied his ass off through that entire. He's got amazing genes. He can live to be 1,000. He can live to be 200. That's what he told me. He's 6'1", and by the way, what you pointed out, that's actually evidence of heart disease, as you point out. So that's not being cleared. But we were actually part of the group that urged Ronnie Jackson to give him the MOCA. I have to say, we actually kind of made an issue out of it and kind of embarrassed them into doing it. We had a bunch of doctors sign a letter, and we sent it out to like 10,000 press places. But I think, he also brags about having passed it twice, which I think is funny because that obviously means someone administered to him again because they suspected dementia. It's not a good thing.
Dog, cat, tree.
John, can I ask you? Let me ask you a question.
The fact that he keeps talking about it, and people like that, regular people are like, "What the fuck?" And he talks about it with such, it was very hard. The first time he told Chris Wallace, "There's like camera, there's like whatever, there's an elephant." He changes the animals sometimes, but I think if you had your shit together, you would not keep. That seems like something you would not keep bringing up to show how great you are.
On the South Lawn listening to that.
Hey, so John, let me ask you this: when a normal person approaches dementia, how does that affect their underlying personality? And I'll bring this up because we've seen Trump's history of bad behavior back to the 70s with the housing and then all through. His relationships with contractors moving forward. He's been just a bad guy. I can't tell whether or not he's a sociopath. He sure seems like a narcissist, to say the very least. What happens? Do your bad traits become exacerbated as you slip into dementia? They do?
Yep, that's exactly what happens. It's a truism that whatever personality disorder you have gets dramatically worse as you become demented. So it's hard to imagine that he could be worse, right?
Wow.
But we're already seeing it. He's so impulsive and so out of control around this trial, right? He can't contain himself. He really can't. It's like Tourette's. He doesn't have the capacity, I think, to contain himself at this point. So we are seeing basically, and that is another thing that's really scary, right? Because he basically has premorbidly a malignantly narcissistic personality disorder, which means that he is a sociopath, he is narcissistic, he is paranoid, and he is a sadist. This personality disorder was introduced by Eric Fromm to explain the psychology of Hitler, from whom he fled. So this is the worst of the worst. This is the kind of person that would kill millions of people and actually get pleasure out of it and feel powerful by doing it. But imagine then this getting more discontrolled and more impulsive and more erratic. Yeah.
More power. More opportunity to be like that. I have to say, John, I'm glad you're here on a personal level. I have been in court for 7 years, court, cops, whatever, with my ex-wife, family court, and they finally had a psychologist, a psychotherapist exam, because I'm always like, what is the deal? Is she on drugs? I can get my head around that. And they came back, this is 2 weeks ago, and the woman's like, okay, good news. She's not a psychopath who wants to kill you. I'm like, that is good news. She's a sociopath who wants other people to kill you. And she has this narcissistic personality disorder, which I've been reading for the last few years, a lot of books about it. It seems like something that people didn't talk about when I was young. They'd say, you're narcissistic, you're a narcissist. It'd be like, well, a little bit, I'm an actor, but it's really become well-defined as a thing. and you definitely could see that with him. I've known Trump 40 years. He is those things, and he's always been. And the problem is, the people around him, which there was people around him who go, oh Jesus, okay, that's not. But now they're not there. Now they're the sycophants that are like, yeah, he's done awful things to me, and they have to know how it's going to end for them. So what is their disorder? What is wrong with the people?
Great question.
Who know better, but are like, oh, enabling this guy?
I think they're taking advantage of him.
Go ahead, John.
I think what you're right about this lack of guardrails, and this is what happens with a malignant narcissist when they take power, whether it's Saddam Hussein or Hitler or Mao or Stalin. Okay, they purge and they purge and they purge. Okay, so you may have been a conscientious revolutionary, but now you're a counter-revolutionary because you're not going along with the leader's great latest grift or mad kind of idea. And then when you boil this down, what you get are fanatical true believers and total psychopaths who are just using this as an opportunity, to grift. And these are the people who would be around him as his cabinet as he became disabled. I mean, it would be like the weekend at Bernie's White House.
Yeah, it's worse. I know some of these people around him. And Tom, to your point, and Doc, what you talked about is absolutely true. These people that are left around Donald Trump now are using him to their own ends. And those are not democratic ends. They want to burn the system down and they want to control it. And that's my concern. If you look at any of the policies that the people around him have proposed, should Donald Trump get back in office, Donald Trump will be the least of our concerns. It's those policies that these people support and thus are propping him up so they have their shot at doing it to the U.S. That's the right part.
And add the foreign enemies that put them on their payroll. I think you should also add that these people who are also working for Russia or Turkey. So they would be not only manipulating him for their own personal ends, but for our enemies' ends.
Yes, you are.
I have to say, let me say this. At the end of this thing in court with the court psychologist, I go, well, what can I do about her situation? And she goes, nothing. I go, nothing? Because you have to engage a little bit with someone when you have kids. But there is a way to do it. Now, you don't vote for Donald Trump. I think a lot of people in this country, at least a lot of Democrats like me, have post-traumatic stress from him. Just that constant, and you don't even realize it. So we're not at our best. I'm sure I've had it with all this court stuff too, and getting my head around it like, oh, that's my behavior. I'm not my best because of all this bullshit coming at me. And I think the whole country has been like that. Probably even his fans. And how do you protect? I mean, you vote him out of office, but how do you? A lot of people turn their TVs off. A lot of people are like, I don't want to know anything about this. And really, you can't do that either because this election. So what do you suggest, John?
Well, it's toxic. And to be honest, after Biden won the election, I resigned from politics. I had the pinned tweet at Duty to Warn was, see you guys, it's been real, but I'm going to write my book on psilocybin therapy because it is toxic. But let's talk about that off camera. But what brought me back was the media was gaslighting America by telling them two lies. First, they were pathologizing Biden's normal signs of aging, like the forgetfulness, and normalizing Trump's gross signs of dementia. And nobody with the right letters after their name were stepping in the gap to correct the record. And so I really honestly felt I had an obligation to step forward, because if I didn't, no one would. But since I've started a petition, and I have 500 licensed medical and mental health professionals who have agreed with me that he's showing signs of probable dementia. It's like the emperor's new clothes. Someone had to say it. But now that we're saying it, lots of people are saying it and seeing it. And so it just was a civic duty. It is toxic. It does suck.
Does your
it does cause trauma.
Does your dementia allow for moments of lucidity that defy the diagnosis? And is that kind of what they're doing right now with him?
Yeah, no, he obviously has lucid moments. And also, I think he does sundown a little bit, because I think he makes a lot of these mistakes more at the end of the day when he's not at his best. So, yeah, no, of course he's but look, he's falling asleep in court. Allegedly, he's farting, loudly and productively and effusively. But you know,
So does
of course,
Brian.
anyone can fall asleep. In and of itself, that wouldn't be necessarily a symptom of anything. I fall asleep at dinner parties, but
Yeah.
I don't fall asleep when I'm in court. And you'd think your adrenaline would be running then. But he's fallen
Let me,
asleep 4 out of 5 days.
John, let me jump in because this is Jesse Waters last night on Fox was talking about what we're doing to Trump by making him sit in this office. It's a short clip, but I find it revealing that they know more than they let on.
They're draining his brain and his body. Now, I don't like to sit. They say sitting is the new smoking. You're going to take a man who's usually golfing or in action, and you're going to sit him in a chair in freezing temperatures and just let people rip you and you can't say anything? 4 days a week, 8 hours a day? That takes a toll.
It does take a toll. I think that President Trump will withstand that toll because he's an extraordinarily resilient individual.
Okay. The thing what I find interesting, what Fox does is they just touch the surface of this stuff and then they immediately retreat because they know the depths of not just his depravity, but just of his psychological state. And I occasionally some people bring it up. Once you go into that room, you can't get out. There are no exits because you realize what's there and you can't back out. And I just wonder, like, if in fact the 25th Amendment is a very difficult tool to remove a sitting president. You got to get the cabinet and the vice president to all sign off. And I mean, there's a good chance we'll have Marjorie Taylor Greene on his cabinet. It's insane, right? I mean, even to have these.
He's going to be on the ballot in November.
No, let me just say, I have to say something. Yeah, as an actor, I like it cold.
Yeah.
The colder, that will keep you awake. Yeah. And I also like sitting down. I'd rather sit down. I'd rather lay down than sit down. If I get my kids to play games where I'm actually laying down, I'll do that. But, standing up would be, so all these things, the courtroom is cold.
It's BS. It's BS, but there's actually a psychological term for how persuasive it is. It's called the inoculation theory. They purposely introduce the virus. It's like a virus inoculation. They give you a weak form of the virus so that you'll build up antibodies. They give you a weak form of the liberal argument or let's say the reality-based argument, right? But then they give it a twist. So you've been exposed to the fact that he looks haggard and weird, right? And like someone who's deteriorating. But now we have an explanation for it. So yes, we've admitted that what you're seeing before your eyes is true. That's the weak form, but we're giving you a framework in which to understand it. Now we've inoculated you. Now you're intellectually impervious to anyone saying that court is showing how he's deteriorating because you already got the explanation. What you said about the amendment.
Also, John, the dementia thing is separate than the personality disorder. I mean, and I've said before that times, I've worked with Trump in the day, did all this stuff. And he had something about him that made you feel sorry for him. And he also, when you talk to him, like he would say shit to me. He introduced me to Karen McDougal. He's like, come to Playboy Mansion and meet my new girlfriend. I was like, he'd just done my sports show. I go, okay, I'll go over there. He goes, I got a vodka or a new tequila. And I go there with him and I meet her. She seems very nice. And he's like, oh, yes, and Melania is here and my daughter. And they all pose together. And there wasn't like he was looking like, oh, I'm scared about this. Like a normal person be like, what? Right. He has that thing. Like this is the way it is. And again, he did have a thing where he feels sorry for him. He's really using that with the people to give the $5 donations and stuff. Because even though there's no reason in the world to feel sorry for him, except of who he is and what he's doing to himself and everybody else. But he does get people. There's something, and I think it's because his personality disorder, you don't realize, you're like, wow, he seems like troubled. I feel sorry for that guy, but there's, I don't know what that is.
Sorry for him if he didn't wield power. I feel I feel empathy for him as a human being, but no sympathy for him because of what he's doing to the rest of it.
Yeah, my empathy's over. My empathy for him is over too.
Well,
Brian, you said a few minutes ago, Brian, you still have a doubt as to whether or not he'll be on the ticket in the fall?
I wonder. Yes, I do. I don't know. Look, we're presupposing that the two people that are going to be in this race in November are Trump and Biden. We've not had either. Neither party has had their their convention yet.
Mhm.
There are things that could happen between now and then. Both of them are elderly gentlemen. The actuarial tables could take hold. Donald Trump could go down in this trial. Biden is in it because he thinks he can defeat, Trump. When Biden first walked into the White House, I was under the impression, as most people were, that, in the press pool, that he was a one-term president. He said he was the bridge to the future. Now he wants to be that future. So I think that either one of these two guys may not be, but I really think that Donald Trump, and based on what the doctor just said here, you talk about going over the edge. This guy's there. He's on the precipice. We noticed it in the White House. I mean, screaming at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You walk in at 7 in the morning. He never kept any kind of reasonable hours. There was evidence that he walked through. In fact, there were Secret Service agents. Here's another one, Tom. You're talking about weird in the White House. There's Secret Service agents told me he would walk through at night after everybody was out, would walk through the press area and look at our desks and look at and it took him 3 years to get in there. And how about being told that you could solve the COVID problem with the introduction of sunlight and bleach? I was there for that. I think I may have asked the question. That kind of nutty shit. You see that then, you see him now, and I have seen him twice since he's left the White House. And I used to have to attend those rallies quite a bit. I don't think he can make it through to November.
No,
I have to say that COVID, when he said the COVID with a powerful light, maybe you can put it in your. That was kind of charming because that did remind me of my freaking grandpa.
All right, well, so I want to go.
Came up with shit that you're like, oh my god.
Okay, Tom, but let's go back to the important thing that John said earlier about the comment about whatever apathy or apathy we have as individuals in the voting republic that actually vote for this guy. Okay.
Yeah.
When my grandfather, he told me when he got back from World War I that he stopped smoking. They were calling them coffin nails. They knew cigarettes were killing you back then. What stopped people from this dangerous habit? Price and availability, but mostly price. People stopped smoking for the most part because it just became too expensive, at least a large demographic of America. And I've read that study somewhere that a big reason that they stopped smoking is a realization that this was not affordable. But what is the key?
But also how hard Congress did a good job of this, of pointing out, taking the actual cancer research, because I don't know if you remember, but the 6 heads of the 6 tobacco companies, including one owned by the Tisch family, friends of mine, they sat for Congress. They go, "Do you think smoking is dangerous?" Or no, even though they had all the research. So it was that too.
Sure.
They're incredibly people.
But my point about that,
yeah,
it's not about the cigarettes. It's about how people view something that's dangerous, right? As opposed to something that has a certain excitement to it. And Trump definitely has that. Trump gets people up to see what he did. How many times did we get
so much anymore? The last
fair enough.
The last time I saw him, it wasn't an excited venue. It wasn't a crowded venue. The T-shirt vendors. Now, look, there are people who show up to those events just to sell and make money off of Donald Trump's name. I mean, you haven't lived till you've walked through a venue where Donald Trump is speaking and there's guys selling weed hats. That's
but let me finish my point. So my point is that we got 6 or 7 states that will determine this next election. So the idea, if this was a popular vote, nobody'd be worrying about this. It'd be fait accompli, it'd be over, right? But it's not. And because of the Electoral College, he has a real opportunity to become president again. And he'll be, like you said, it's a weekend at Bernie's kind of story here. People are controlling all these other avenues. He's not going to be it. He wants to debate Biden so bad. I'm not that so sure that that's a great idea for Trump.
Biden.
Yeah.
He won't
to. Okay. But my point is,
he wants to and he won't do it.
What's going to have changed between 2020 and 2024 to make this guy become president? Not in a political way, but the personalities involved. Have they successfully painted Biden as a doddering old fool to the point that Trump would actually seem more capable of commanding this position?
Well, this is the gaslighting that got me into this controversy in the first place. Twice as many people thought Biden was cognitively impaired. So literally the reality was the opposite of what most people thought it was. And so we have to correct this record. And by the way, just my last comment about the weekend at Bernie's White House, they used to have an expression in the Middle Ages: a bad king is better than no king, but no king is better than a child king. We would have a child king. We would have someone who was mentally a child. And that's literally the worst situation for any state to have.
Yeah. But also the right side media, Fox News, these guys have done a great job of focusing on Joe Biden's mistakes, whatever, without acknowledging the other. They focus on Joe Biden, his son. Oh, his son's a criminal and a drug addict, just because they are unable.
It's been the mainstream media too.
They did back off a bit. They did back off a bit after the State of the Union, where he kind of slam dunked him.
Well,
they said he was on coke. He was on cocaine then.
Well, to be honest, we have done a horrible job. I watched, I was in the briefing room and an idiot asked the question, why do we need to make our own steel? We have allies that do it. I mean, just the stupidest freaking question. But we're bad. They're bad. We're too young. There's very few people with any experience covering this president, and the people that run his communication department are among the worst I've ever seen. That aside, the real problem, and I've spent the last 3 months, you talked about those 7 states, Chip. I've spent 3 months going to those 7 states. Here's what you've got on the ground, and this is what can make the difference. In those states that are combative right now, there's no Trump organization. None.
No money.
They have no money, and there's no Trump organization. His only his supporters in those states are what is, that's his system. That's his framework. Biden, on the other hand, has people on the ground. They have people working at small affairs and going to fairs and going to the Food Lion and going to the PTA meetings and the small. So they're doing all of that.
Is the DNC running this, or is it Biden's campaign?
It's Biden's campaign with assist from the DNC. But here's the problem: they're horribly organized. I've never seen a more disorganized group of people in my life, and that goes back to the White House. One of the reasons why Trump and his supporters, and I don't even call them Republicans anymore, when they go to Milwaukee, they ought to just call the damn party the MAGA party and get it over with, because all the Republicans have fled, or most of them. But the simple fact of the matter is, in the White House, they do not know how to present the president's message. And that's part of the reason why that Trump and his minions have made inroads in making us think that Biden is, incapacitated. And I'll give you one example. The bridge collapse. Now, Biden shows up. They walk him across a parking lot. There's no stage. It's not even risers. There are more reporters there than there are supporters. And they staged it wrong. And so they had to move people around. They moved the teleprompter. There was very little lighting. All of this, Donald Trump did well. If it had been Donald Trump, it would have been a massive riser and a stage, red, white, and blue balloons. You'd have the big Klieg lights. You'd have a band, and you'd have 300 or 400 people out there. Donald Trump knew how to present a message. The message was horrible. Biden has actually done the real work. And for the last 4 years has done, look, he got aid to Ukraine passed. That's a bipartisan.
Yeah, it was huge. And the border bill that Johnson killed, he did as well with Langford. It really did work.
He got Johnson at the White House and convinced him to move.
All right.
They don't communicate that well.
Let me say this. The last thing about Joe Biden. That's not who Joe Biden. He's authentic. Like, he's that guy. They could pitch him all this stuff and say, well, Trump does this. But that's Trump, the fake show business thing. And Biden is authentic. I agree. I'm sure they could do a better job of meeting in the middle, but Biden's just not. I mean, people are always like, why doesn't he call Trump names? Why did he do that? That's not who he is.
Yeah.
And he genuinely has been a very, very good president. Trump,
yes, and he's made some smart comments. Yeah. Yesterday, the press, we were standing there and they go, what's your legacy on abortion? And he looks at the reporter and goes, what's your legacy as a reporter?
We
I
need
do
some
like
more of
when he
that.
gets scrappy. I like when he
John,
gets
I know you got to
Okay.
go. John, I know
Yeah.
you got to go. But one last question: do you think that we could, if he had a Mitch McConnell moment, Trump did, where he just loses it and just stares for a bit? Would, in your opinion, would that be enough?
He's
to
already had
create-
many.
Had those.
They're
Yeah.
No, but I mean,
repetitive.
the one where he literally can't talk and they have to walk him away.
You know what?
I haven't
This story's. I have to run because I have a patient, but have me on again, and I'll tell you why.
All
This
right, we will.
story isn't going anywhere. This story isn't going anywhere. And
No.
anytime, any week of the year you have me on, we'll have new Gettysburg addresses to talk about, new moments of blank staring, new
Yeah.
phonemic aphasias, you name it, we'll have it.
All right,
Yes.
buddy.
So I gotta
Thank you,
go.
John.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
buddy.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.
Really
Thank
nice.
you.
That was Dr.
Thank
John
you.
Gartner, an American psychologist, psychiatrist, activist, and former part-time assistant, a professor